Okay, good afternoon, students. Now we are going to have the presentation of Dr. Jeffrey MacCrary of a talk about coastal wetlands as bird habitats. I believe Dr. MacCrary is here. Thank you, Dr. MacCrary, for accepting my invitation. I would like to first introduce, I included what is his CV, but I included this in the chat for you to read. And Dr. MacCrary is a technical expert in environmental issues, such as forest use, management of natural areas, freshwater fish, birds, and university education. He is author of dozens of scientific publications and numerous communications in newspapers and other media. He has experience in project management and administrative issues, environmental impact studies in protected area uses, rural agricultural development, hydroelectric energy, wind energy, petroleum exploration, and the proposed Nicaragua interoceanic Grand Canal. He published in the most prestigious journals in the field and has been quoted extensively in major articles in Science and New York Times on issues of the environment and socioeconomic development in the third world. With nothing more to say, I want to leave you with Dr. MacCrary.
Thank you, Dr. Rosales. Can you hear me? Is everybody hearing me?
Yes, perfect.
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
great. Sometimes I goof up like some people do when they're not using this technology all the time. So if there's any problem, please speak up. Please make a note and I'll try to resolve any issue that may emerge. I'm in the US right now, and I've spent a lot of time in Guyana. I've spent maybe almost a year and a half in Guyana. A lot of it was offshore, working on the environmental assessments of the some of the oil concessions for Exxon. So today, though, I want to talk about the coastal wetlands. I want to talk not about freshwater. There's a lot of interesting wetlands in Guyana for the reasons you guys already know. I want to talk about one particular sector that's not considered so much in terms of the biodiversity. And I want to focus on that place and its biodiversity for the next 45 minutes. And that is a coastal wetland that is right there next to you guys who are actually in Georgetown. So you don't need to see a map, but these maps show you land use and forest type distributions in the area, and where the cultivation, what they call cultivated area, is actually, in the case of Georgetown, it's built area. And as you guys know, the land that Georgetown is sitting on is and around it is land that over many thousands of years has been built up through the delivery of sediments from the Guyana Shield downstream and then piling up along the shoreline, which has led to a pretty interesting event, which is a huge mudflat in much of the coastline of Guyana. I've worked on the coastline in Guyana in every just about the entirety of the coastline. whether from one of those little fishing boats or on the beach. And so today, though, I want to talk about Region 4, and I want to talk about specifically about the part of the coastline that runs from the Demerara River over to about the university. And the first thing I want to point out, I heard your prior lecture, and I see sort of where you're going with this course, and I'm hoping that this fits in well with it. And the first thing I want to present with us is how we assess the components of this wetland, because this is a wetland. It's specifically a mudflat, but it's a mudflat that has some alterations in it and some natural features in it that need to be highlighted. The first one is that it is a mudflat. There's a lot of mud deposited. It's a very horizontal substrate. Between high tide and low tide, there are points where there may be as much as a kilometer of mud exposed during low tide that is later covered up. I'll come back to that. There's the seawall, which is very important to a significant part of Georgetown, as you guys know. There's riprap or piles of rock along that wall in certain places that is used to diffuse the kinetic energy of the waves when the waves are coming in at high tide. There's mangrove that is returning in some places because there's a serious effort to regenerate mangrove in some of the spots in the Georgetown area and some other places. Some of those places had mangroves that were either cut down or the currents ripped them up. There are jetties, which are used for various reasons. One of the reasons for putting in a jetty is to create conditions that allow the mangrove to return. There are different kinds of constructions. There's an old resort, for instance, that's next to there's a bandstand that's at, I think it's at Vissingen, that is inhabited by by not very desirable people most of the time, but it's actually a construction inside the wetland area, and it has a yard around it that is utilized and is a different habitat type. And of course, there's Shell Beach, which you'll see a lot of in places like behind the Marriott and the Pegasus hotels. There are several functions. I'm just going to list a few of them right now, but birds have several functions performed in this habitat, and one of them is feeding. We're going to see some aspects of feeding. There's a landing site, which is especially important in southward migration of the migratory birds, which we're going to talk about. And the mangroves and some other structures are used for both for roosting and foraging, because there are different kinds of birds that feed in wetlands, and we're only going to look at a few of them. There are a lot of different birds here. Okay, I'm gonna just run through a bunch of birds while we're talking, and then we might have time to at the end to focus on a few other points along the way. Okay, the first one I want to talk about is a white-rumped sandpiper. This might be a bird that you've just noticed as a rather drab brown bird that's too small to pay a lot of attention to if you don't have binoculars or a really high-powered camera to look at and distinguish it from some other birds that we'll also see some pictures of them. And so I showed to the right side of this, oops, let me, I've made a, okay. This is the white-rumped sandpiper, and I want to point out a few things in this map on the right side of the paper here of the screen. The pink zone at the top is in Canada, and it's up in Alaska as well. Though, and it's, in fact, I'm not sure if those lands that are over by Greenland belong to Canada or if they may belong to the Greenland system. Those are the nesting areas for the white-rumped sandpiper. So this bird nests in the coastal areas of the furthest north reaches of the Western Hemisphere. Then if you look toward the bottom of the diagram, and that's the south in this case, and you'll see in southern Argentina and in southern Chile, this bird occupies what is, in this case, in the blue, are the alternate season habitat areas for this bird. So the white-rumped sandpiper has a very long migration that's made twice yearly. In some period around the beginning of October, it's leaving Canada. Maybe it's leaving as early as September, and it flies over the rest of Canada, of Eastern Canada, the Eastern United States, across the Caribbean, through the Antilles. Some of them on the westward margin fly through Eastern Mexico and Central America. They're the yellow marked areas in the map show the distributions as those birds are moving south to their what we call winter habitat, or where they're moving northward to return to their nesting habitat. And this bird's arrival in Guyana, you guys know quite well that the Antilles may provide resting spots for this very long migration for birds. However, Guyana isn't very close to those islands. And you can get in a boat and go in a lot of directions from the shore of Guyana, and you're not going to find land for a long way. And so when these birds arrive in Guyana and they look down and see the shoreline, they're going to be very tired, and they're going to want to land at the very first spot and rest. So I've seen flocks of as many as 100 birds behind the Marriott Hotel on the Shell Beach and in the areas where they've put in volleyball courts and stuff like that behind them, where people play cricket or volleyball. And they're resting, and they're preparing for the rest of their trip. So this is a bird that isn't in Guyana all the time, but it's in Guyana in October and November, and it's in Guyana again in the springtime. Okay, here's another one that looks incredibly similar to the untrained observer, we could say, to the white-rumped sandpiper, and it's called semi-palmated sandpiper. And the semi-palmated sandpiper has a similar nesting area, and its winter area is different. It's in mostly northern Central America, and then it's in as well in the northern South America, that Western South America and northern South America, along coastal regions and the Antilles. Okay, this bird can be one of the most abundant birds in the winter in the ecosystem that we're talking about. Now, these photos on the left side of these two birds were taken precisely at the shoreline between where those bands play on where they have that big Diwali statue on the Diwali day, and running eastward to Sheriff Street. So this is a photo that's from that mud flat right there, and you can see it's up on pretty dry land in this photo, but sometimes they're down deep in the mud. Okay, this habitat is used by a number of birds which have a number of different feeding strategies, as well as needs to rest sometimes. Here's another migratory bird, but not all of those birds are always necessarily migrating, and not in the same way as the prior two species of birds. In the lower right part of this picture on the left side is a laughing gull, which is quite abundant, and we'll talk about it in a moment. But on the left side is a magnificent frigate bird, which we've all seen because they hover high in the air. They look like dinosaurs. And this is a young one. It's a juvenile. And if we look at the right side, we'll see that this bird actually nests in Guyana. Okay, it will nest in trees, and the trees have to be along the shoreline, which means the mangroves in places like Ogle. I have not seen a nest of this bird in Guyana, but I've seen a lot of these birds just like you have. There are a lot of them present. Now, I'll tell you a couple of particularities to this species. The first one is that this species spends a lot of its time offshore. Many of the birds won't see shoreline or land for days or weeks or maybe even months. They can sleep in the air. But that adaptation is very important because they cannot land in the water. But they are marine birds, which means that if they're spending all that time out there, their food sources are strictly in the water. They don't eat off the land at all, but the way they get their food is by picking it off the surface with their bill. And if they get into the water, they're going to be very distressed because they're not built in a way that makes it easy for them to fly once they've landed in the water. So these birds have this very interesting adaptation. They can sleep while flying, and they may spend a long period of time if they're offshore, especially up in the air. It's common, though, to see them perching on posts at the end of the day in areas around the shoreline, such as in Georgetown. So this bird will be occupying the areas above the water, or maybe the mud itself, to be picking stuff off, but they usually are going to be picking it off of the water. Okay, here's another bird that has a very curious look to it. You may have seen it. It's not that uncommon in Georgetown. And it is, there are three colors here. Let's look at this map on the right. Okay, the orange or pink color is the nesting areas where the bird nests, but where it will leave those areas seasonally. So this nesting area that's up in the northeastern United States is an area that it's along the coast. This area will be abandoned by these birds seasonally. So they will move southward somewhere, and those southward areas may be any of the blue areas, which especially is shown in the eastern coast of Mexico, along where, if you know the cities Veracruz and Tampico and Merida are there in that bend along the Gulf of Mexico. Or they may be moving into the southern United States or South America. And those purple areas in this map are year-round resident areas. So these birds may be nesting in Guyana itself. And I believe that this bird would be nesting on a beach. So they'll probably be nesting on the ground on a beach, which makes the places like Shell Beach and Region 1 especially important, because those might be places where nests on the ground could be successful in the context of Guyana. I'm going to come back to some of the issues about nesting in Guyana toward the end of the talk. Okay. Here's a laughing gull and a little blue heron, and I apologize, I forgot to put the map in on the little blue heron, but it's also a migratory bird. This is an adult. We also have juveniles, which are white, which look like snowy egrets, and we'll see one of those in a moment. These birds migrate to Nicaragua as well. Laughing gulls we'll also talk about in more detail in a moment. The black-bellied plover is yet another bird that is found in Guyana during a season. That's why the northern and eastern South America shoreline are colored in by the blue color. We can see that this bird is also present in the winter all through Africa, coastlines, some of inland Africa, South Asia, and Eastern Asia, and Australia. And its nesting areas are northern and western Alaska, northern Canada, and northern Russia. Okay, this bird is not uncommon, but it's not nearly as abundant as those other sandpipers we've talked about earlier, and some other sandpipers. Here's a bird that we've all seen in Guyana, and if it weren't for the kanji pheasant, this would likely be considered to be the national bird of the country. And this bird is remembered by everybody who sees it. It also was menaced, I would add, by the millinery trade, the trade in using feathers for the purposes of adornment and attire. In London, during the turn of the prior century, around 1900, London was a fashion capital of the world, along with Paris. And in those locations, large numbers of feathers, large amounts of feathers were sought for the use in these items, which would then be sold worldwide. And so ladies loved to wear hats that were rather ostentatious and other types of adornments. And so a lot of the birds that we're talking about today, some of those birds have feathers that were very useful for that trade. And this was one of them. This bird is like all of the ones we're talking about today. This bird is also suffering because Guyanese people still eat large numbers of these birds. In Georgetown, per se, probably not so much, but you don't have to go so far to find people who hunt the bird commercially. This is another bird that you may have been able to see so well. All of these are photos that I've taken. These are all photos that I've taken in Georgetown itself, in the area that I've just talked about, from the Demerara River over as far as the university. And the white-cheeked pintail is a duck. It's a duck that is supposedly found year-round in Guyana, supposedly. However, it seems that its movements are probably, what would I say? There may be some seasonal movements that are just not well documented in this species. And as you can see on the map on the right side, it's showing the habitats of this bird, and they're showing year-round habitats that run from the Bahamas, but not so much the United States, down into Cuba, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic, other islands in the Antilles, and then coastlines in Colombia and Venezuela, the Guyanas, and then the Amazon area, and then some in Western and Southern South America as well. The bird is often, but not always, found on these wetlands. Whoops, I'm going to go backward one. Let me make this. Okay. One of the more common birds that's in this wetland is in the foreground. Now, in the background, you guys have all taken a good look at this, but let's just think a bit about what this means. This is an almost tabletop flat, very soft mud surface over much of the area where water comes in and then pulls out each day. And as this water comes in and then fills up, it's bringing in with it nutrients, which are attracting a lot of animal life that are found, and algae and so on, benthic organisms on a lot of scales, which are found in this mud. And we've all seen the guys who are setting the nets. We know that fishing itself is very is a financially lucrative venture. We've all seen people fishing for shrimp along the jetties with nets, and fishing by hook by setting nets. We know that there's a lot of fish to be eaten there. I've had many Guyanese people tell me that the Guyanese people will never starve because the ocean is always giving them something to eat. Um, this is something that I want us to contemplate in the context of this class. Okay, these birds are being attracted here for more than just the simple reason that this is the first land they see after several hundred kilometers of flight. These are photographs that were taken in October of last year, 1 year ago, and right about almost exactly 1 year ago. So these birds, in many cases, they linger long at this spot. They not only rest, they feed. And they feed out of this mud. We'll see some more of that in a moment. Now, with the sanderling, again, let's just look at the map on the right side, and we see that it nests in the far north, and it winters in the global south along coastlines. So it likes saltwater, brackish water habitats in wetland conditions, and it does not linger, apparently, through the United States and southern Canada, for instance, where it's not shown to be yellow in this map. That is not entirely true, but of course, birds will land, and I'm right now in Illinois, right almost in this exact center of the United States. And sanderlings are occasionally seen here, where as they're migrating southward at this time of year, they may stop and rest, and they will often choose a shoreline on a lake or a river wetland to stop and rest, and maybe to poke around and try to find a little bit of food. Okay. I'm just looking at the chat here for a moment. Selena's Resort, thank you. Someone has reminded me what the name of that abandoned structure is. I've birded all around it, and I've done it with great care because I felt like I don't want to impinge on people's privacy, because even though they're poor and homeless, I don't want to be bothering them. And at the same time, I don't want them to bother me or steal my camera. And I've had a few adventures in the area, but I have always kept my stuff, luckily. So these are most of the birds that we're talking about here. Someone has mentioned about being migratory. Most, but not all, of the birds that we've mentioned so far are migratory. Okay, and we're focusing on the use of this wetland for these different reasons that I've mentioned. Okay, here's another bird that nests in the global far north, and then winters in, again, further south, all along the eastern seaboard of the United States, even in Canada, and down to as far as Buenos Aires. And this bird is often seen at this time of year and will continue to be seen until April along the places that we're discussing right now. It's a little easier to pick out than some of these other smallish shorebirds because of two factors. Well, three. One is it's just a little plumper than some of them. The second one is that its legs are bright orange. So as a bird watcher, this is a cue that I may often use to identify a bird quickly, because I may be, if I'm in a place like that, I'm going to be looking at dozens or hundreds of birds at a time, and I'm wanting to identify as many of them as I can for my own purposes, and try to focus on the new and unusual ones each time. So this is a bird that is not super abundant, but it's almost always present at these times. And does someone notice what in particular the bird is walking on? Where do you think the bird is walking at the moment of this photograph? Anybody notice something different about this photograph from, say, let's pull up another photograph just to go back. We looked at that
On a
one.
beach, not a mud flat.
Yes, it's okay. I went back to the sanderling, and this is that really squishy mud that the bird's flying over. It's not actually in it, but it's flying over that squishy mud that, if we walked out there, we, as mere mortals, we would have a very hard time. Those guys who fish just have this amazing capacity to get out to their nets and get their fish out of the nets and reset the nets by usually using a huge piece of board or styrofoam or something. However, the sanderling isn't actually landed in that very soft mud. And this bird is not standing in the really soft mud. What's it standing on? Say that again. Someone spoke up.
The beach, like sand beach.
Yeah, we can see shells. So this piece of beach, where would you suspect to find a piece of beach in the area we're talking about that looks like this? If you've looked a little, you might be able to recognize it.
Like 63 Beach?
Yeah. Yeah. I wasn't thinking about that, but you're correct. Over there, it's there's a lot of shell on the beach, and the beach is firm. But in Georgetown, how about right behind the Pegasus and the Marriott Hotel, especially the Marriott? The beach is quite, not only is it compact, it's got lots of eroded shell bits in it. And so as the tide goes out, you'll see muddier, softer areas next to the pier, but they're never as muddy as this particular picture right here in that area. And this photograph is probably taken a little to the east of Salinas Resort. Okay, just a small difference in what to us may be something that we neglect to recognize what the difference is. Of course, we would pay a lot of attention to this if we're wanting to get in the water, because people get into the water all the time where this turnstone is standing at this moment, and not so much over at the spot that I was just discussing, over by Salinas. Okay, The turnstone has its name for a reason, and the reason is how it forages and what kind of habitat it uses to do that. So it's walking on firmer land, and it's not in the water, and it's capable of and prefers to be poking around under objects. So I didn't put one of those in here, but I have lots of photos of, for instance, after say a Hindu holiday, there's certain holidays that you guys know better than I do when and which ones they are, that someone may be going to the beach with food and other objects and leaving them on the beach, or leaving maybe some apples or waste or something. And these birds will be poking around those objects, and they actually just love that stuff. So the different birds are going to be using what may be to us indistinct differences in habitat, but to them may be very important. So that particular type of beach, and then the walkway along the seawall, are often used by the ruddy turnstone. Okay, here's another similarly small bird that we often call peep, to lump a bunch of these birds that, without really good looks at them, they're all from a distance sort of the same. They're small, they're brown. This one is called a semi-palmated plover. And okay, just to color in a bit of what's being discussed here, semi-palmated refers to their foot. And they have a palmate foot, means there's webbing between the toes, as in the case of, say, a duck, where that permits them to swim quite well. Other birds, like most land birds, don't have webbing between their toes. And then the semi-palmated plover has a small amount of webbing between toes that gives it its name, which distinguishes it from other similar plovers. Okay, now this bird on the right, we can again see its range is from the far north down into the Gulf of Mexico and along South America's coastline as well. Okay, it's very common in Guyana's Georgetown coastline. A lesser yellowlegs, again, has a very similar range. It can be seen during migration all through the US, but it's the majority of the birds fly even beyond Guyana. They keep going, but some of them are always going to be found in this deep, thick, yucky mud along the area around Salinas, for instance. Okay, the lesser yellowlegs is very similar to another bird called the greater yellowlegs. And they are indeed different in size and some other distinctions that are not easily seen. And birders spend a lot of time trying to decide which one is which when we look at them. They're both found all winter long in that shoreline and other places. There are moments, however, where one or both of these species can be found in huge flocks. For instance, in the football field of the University of Guyana, when it floods at this time of year, and these birds are migrating downward from, downward's not the right word, southward, because that's not down. It may be up if we turn the map around. It's an arbitrary choice that north is up. But as the birds are flying south, they may choose to rest and forage in the football fields. So the football fields of the University of Guyana are also wetlands, folks. if you're wanting to talk about wetlands, you can talk about a lot of the city of Georgetown. These photos, this photo is one of the very first and only photos that document this species in Guyana. Okay, the Hudsonian godwit nests in a few spots in the extreme north in Alaska and along the north coast of Canada. And as you can see, there are documented areas where it will be found in migration, those yellow areas in the map, and then in the far south of South America, they winter. They do not show yellow along Guyana, but here in this photograph, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them in this single photo. No, there are 4 of them because the bird on the foreground on the right is a lesser yellowlegs, and the others are Hudsonian godwits. They look pretty similar, don't they? Okay. Great egret nests almost all the way through the United States. And then it's also found year-round all through South America and Mesoamerica. That's the large bird in the center. The rest of those birds are snowy egrets. This is a snowy egret, and this is over by the jetty at Salinas. And he's in breeding plumage. And we can see from the purple on this map that they're found here year-round. And they're quite abundant. This is a laughing gull. We were going to talk about them. We're finally to the spot. They will breed in the pink areas and the purple areas of this map, which means not Guyana, but they're here a lot of the year in Guyana. Okay, and here are some birds in the mud off the jetty at Salinas. And there are adaptations of birds to provide advantages to feed in stuff like this. You can see that these birds are all a few inches down or several inches down into the mud. To be standing in this mud is kind of, well, what are they doing there, one might ask? They're actually feeding, but the feeding strategies vary from species to species. Now, you might know a former student of university named Ravindra. Ravindra worked with a few students from the university and actually published a paper about the feeding strategies of snowy egrets along this area. And it was published in I think it's called something, I'm going to forget the name of the journal, but it's published in a scientific journal. And I'm going to focus on a particular aspect of this feeding strategy right now, which is important to this area. We can see how loose this mud is, and the water has now receded recently, so the mud has not totally drained of water. It'll get a little bit thicker and more viscous before the tide comes back in, but the open water is now off of this mud, and the birds have moved in. And here there are snowy egrets, but next to the snowy egrets are laughing gulls. Okay, the reason why I'm looking at this is because I'm watching what these birds do as feeding. So are not working the mud to find stuff by feel with their beak. Instead, they're looking. And when they see a little movement down in that mud, they think there might be an invertebrate or a vertebrate in this case. And then they'll launch after it and try to grab it in their bill. And the bills of those birds are quite a bit longer. Their necks are quite a bit longer, so they can reach a long way. Their legs are longer. So it allows them a large radius to be watching the mud to find something to catch and eat. It won't be right there on the top of the mud. It'll be down under the mud. The laughing gulls are there though, because they're going to try to feed on stuff that the snowy egret catches. And this is called kleptoparasitism. So here, this snowy egret grabbed a fish. Can you see there's a long, thin fish in the guy's mouth on the right side? And he immediately has two laughing gulls assail him. They've just been waiting for him to do that. And right there you can see a fish in the guy's bill. And these two birds are very interested in getting his food. Rather than fishing, they're waiting for him to catch something, and then they're going to try to take it from him. So they're harassing him. And in this photo, you can see the jetty. I'm actually on the jetty at the moment this happened. And they're continuing to harass. They're getting right up on him. This one and this photo, the laughing gull is standing on his back and hitting him in the neck. He flies off. He's still got his prey. He's still got it. He's flying over the jetty, and then he loses it. And look who's got it. So off he goes. The laughing gull got the food. And so this is a point of, I think, of how what I want to what I want to stress out of this part is we have seen a very partial demonstration of the diversity of birds that are occupying these wetlands that are in close vicinity to all who are in Georgetown. And this is a wetland that is very, very stressed. Okay, and I want to talk about two more things that are actually not birds, but they're important. Okay, we know about the fish as well because we've all eaten some of them. But there are manatees right there. This photograph is taken actually from a boat tied to the post that is within 25, 30 meters of the jetty in the Demerara River. And there are multiple manatees that are daily observable right at the jetty. Okay, and the manatees are not only in the national park, there are many that are in their wild habitat, and they go back and forth from the Demerara River over to Kitty at least, and maybe even further, those particular individuals. And I want to talk also about another animal who has been brought to Guyana. This is an exotic invasive species. Okay, this mongoose, I don't know offhand which species of mongoose it is because there are a few, but this particular mongoose is plentiful along the riprap. It lives in the riprap. And why do I want to bring it up? It's because we've talked earlier about birds that nest on the ground, and those birds that actually are found nesting in Guyana along the shoreline and in other areas where these animals are found, they don't only occupy the shoreline. These animals will eat their nests, their eggs or chicks. And so they're not part of the natural ecosystem. They're not the biggest threat to the ecosystem because which species is the largest threat to the ecosystem that we're discussing? Anyone want to offer a guess? I think you know. It's Homo sapiens. Okay. First of all, we brought this animal. And secondly, we're doing a lot of other things to this ecosystem, to this habitat in particular that we're talking about, that is affecting it dramatically. Okay. So, okay, someone has brought up, what about dolphins? And I have a lot of pictures of dolphins, but I don't have any pictures of dolphins in the particular wetland we're talking about. And dolphins are not so much wetland species, at least in the context of Guyana, but they are definitely marine species that are in the concession areas of where the oil is found. And the oil is a menace to the wetland habitat we're discussing. At some moment, the oil wells will develop a problem and leak large quantities, and you can be assured that in your lifetime you're going to have oil on your beaches. I've lived in Texas a long time, and that's what happened in Texas. That's what's happened in California, and that's what's happened in Louisiana, Alabama. Any place that you've got oil wells, it's eventually going to happen. Okay. So the context of this beach as a wetland and other beaches that have access to the ocean is partly needing to be informed by the eventuality of an oil spill in its management. Okay, among those other things. Others are plastic, other types of garbage. There's a lot of garbage, but the plastic is particularly large in the case of Guyana. Okay, we're about at the time limit now, so I'm apologizing if I'm going too far. So maybe there's a comment beyond the chats. I see you guys are bringing up some important points. It's true, mongoose eat rodents, they eat snakes. Anybody have any other comments? Well, I want to leave you with that there are, I hope today we can see that there are wetlands that are not considered, if we just look at a wetland that's not considered in the sense of needs for protecting for wildlife, we can see that the enormous diversity and abundance of wildlife that's in them. There's a food web that's extensive in it, and it is among the most impacted of wetland sites that I know. And in spite of that, it's very rich. And I hope you guys can appreciate it and become technically, use your what you've maybe get motivated by to become technically capable and aware to make the best protection, given that it's going to be continue to be on the edge of a very large and growing population. Okay, thanks a lot. And maybe I'll give this back to Dr. Rosales at this point, if there's no other questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. MacCrary. Indeed, we started at 11:30, and I hope the students were able to see the importance of the bird community that you show for Region 4. That is one of the most impacted in the coastal lands in Guyana. And still see all the diversity that you show that are using the wetlands, mud wetlands and sand wetlands here in the coastal areas of Guyana. Thank you very much, Dr. MacCrary. Okay, students, we'll see you next Thursday, and thank you for the attendance. And I will send the recording of the presentation. I will include it in the Moodle. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.